Good evening, Facebook friends, revolutionaries, citizens of America and the planet. Welcome to tonight's Fireside Chat. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you for all you're doing to be the resistance and to stand up for an America and a world that works for all of us. Indeed, the crisis grows by the hour, as does the resistance. Together we are unstoppable. And we're here tonight to remind each other how unstoppable we are and how eminently solvable this crisis is that we're facing. Tonight we're going to talk about the crisis on the Korean Peninsula, which has flared in a big way over the last few days. This crisis has been long in the making, and there are many dimensions of this crisis that are not exactly being discussed. So I wanted to bring in some of that background tonight and share it with you. You may be aware, you may not. These are things that I myself was not aware of until recently, actually traveling to the Global Greens Conference in Liverpool. A couple months back, I had an opportunity to meet with Korean Greens and hear from the inside what their struggle is all about on the Korean Peninsula. And it's actually pretty staggering. What we know in the last few days, just a quick recap, is that North Korea fired off an intercontinental ballistic missile. This is a missile that's capable of going between continents, basically, like the term says. And it's believed it could go as far as Alaska. And so this escalates the conflict. It escalates the danger. This is a terrible development. No two ways about it. But it's important to put it in context. I should add, after Korea fired off its intercontinental ballistic missile, then you had this show of force on the part of the U.S. and South Korea firing off a barrage of missiles into the Sea of Japan just off the coast of North Korea. Sort of, saber-rattling against saber-rattling. But, step back a few weeks and months, what just recently happened was a show of force on the part of U.S. and South Korea. These exercises, basically military exercises. And for the last many years, in fact, the U.S. has been running mock nuclear bombing drills of North Korea. And if you go back a little bit further to the Cold War, we actually had nuclear weapons stationed in South Korea. Once George Bush came into office, things deteriorated again in a big way. Under Bill Clinton, we were actually negotiating with North Korea, and they agreed to give up their plutonium development, a major piece of a nuclear weapons program. They agreed to that, but then when George W. Bush came in and began saber-rattling, identified North Korea as part of the axis of evil, and the U.S. developed a policy of first nuclear strike, meaning that we would strike first with no hesitation. We would use a nuclear weapon first against North Korea, among some other nations. You can see why it is that North Korea is a little bit paranoid and, has regarded a nuclear weapon as their guarantee of survival. Unfortunately, it's not a guarantee of survival. It's a guarantee of catastrophe for everybody on all sides. But it's important to recognize that North Korea's irrationality, is not so irrational. And North Korea's resort to nuclear weapons is a standoff against what they've been threatened with actually for decades. And then if you go back further, you get to this Korean War, which was never ended. A peace treaty has never been signed in regards to that war. There's an armistice, but that armistice could be violated at any time. So the people of North Korea, if you can believe it, have basically been living, North Korea and South Korea for that matter, have both been living with a state of borderline warfare, potentially imminent warfare, for the past 70 years. And what I only learned about recently was that if you go back before that 70 years, you had decades of an unbelievably brutal occupation of Korea by the Japanese in the run-up to the Second World War. And this goes all the way back to the early 1900s. So this is an area that's been absolutely devastated, that's been occupied. And after the end of the Second World War, you had basically the U.S. Asserting a military occupation in South Korea, and you had initially the Soviet Union occupying North Korea. So you had a standoff of great powers. So the Koreans, after being brutally occupied by the Japanese for decades, during the war, before the war is over, then the warring powers occupy. And, you know, our army is in there still because of U.S. considerations. We've installed this very inflammatory, destabilizing, so-called anti-missile system, which has the name THAAD, which stands for Terminal High Altitude Anti-Missile Defense System. A mouthful, but it's basically this concept that we can shoot missiles down, which is dubious, and many nations regard as just an enabling mechanism to allow a first strike, that it would help stop a response. So these anti-missile defense systems are extremely inflammatory. Here's the well-kept secret. I'm going to cut to the chase here. Sounds like a really complicated story, but fortunately there seems to be a really simple solution. And that's what both China and Russia put forward just in the last couple of days. They were together. The Chinese Premier Xi was visiting Russia, was visiting with Putin, and they both said basically, well, you know, if the U.S. will stop conducting this mock warfare exercise and will pull back on this nuclear missile defense, the THAAD system, they will really lean on North Korea, and they call on North Korea to basically freeze its nuclear weapons program, to just stop it in its tracks right now. It does not have nuclear capability. It has the anti-ballistic missile, but it doesn't have the small nuclear warheads that you need in order to fit on it, and a variety of other things. It's not there yet. And they're saying, let's each participate here. Let's each do the right thing. Both the U.S. and South Korea and North Korea can each do their part. And let's stop this madness from going further. Let's do that as a first step. And by the way, North Korea has already agreed to that. They have been calling for that actually for years. So let's not ignore the elephant in the room here, which is a way to shut down this conflict right now. Both parties back off. That's what it takes. And what nobody is talking about here is that there's actually a nuclear weapons ban, a treaty that will ban nuclear weapons, which is being advanced in the United Nations right now as we speak, that is expected to be formally announced at the end of this week. Interesting that when this nuclear weapons ban was first launched last October, guess who voted for it? Guess who voted for a ban on nuclear weapons? The only nuclear nation to support banning nuclear weapons was, guess who? North Korea. Really showing more evidence that North Korea is backed into a corner here. And if we really could do the right thing for the people of the world, all over the world, because a nuclear exchange, even a limited one, will be deadly for us all because of nuclear winter and essentially the blotting out of our food supply because of what happens in a nuclear winter. We could talk about that more later if you want, but there's no safe nuclear exchange, period. And it's the right thing to do for all of us, to just get rid of the friggin' nukes, period. That's what we should be doing, and that's what most of the nations of the world want to do, except, guess who? The nuclear-armed powers. They just want to freeze things the way they are and keep a stranglehold on development. But it's not going to work for all kinds of reasons. That's just not going to work. The original agreement was that we would move forward towards nuclear disarmament. That's the whole principle of non-proliferation, meaning everybody and their mother, father, sister, and brother gets a nuclear weapon, which, you know how safe that is. It's not safe at all with nuclear weapons. We need to shut down the nuclear weapons. That's the larger solution here. The solution to the conflict on the Korean Peninsula is a solution that's going to benefit us all. Let me just mention a couple other really good things. You may have heard the announcement last week that a federal court has ruled in favor of the Standing Rock Sioux. So after all that work, after all that anguish, after all that incredible courage by our indigenous brothers and sisters, they have prevailed for all of us. So the Dakota Access Pipeline is being stopped by a legal ruling so that an environmental impact study can be done. If that study is done, there's no question that building a pipeline underneath the Missouri River, upstream of as many as 18 million people who rely on that river for drinking water, that is not a safe thing to do. So this is just an unbelievably good development, and it is a tribute to all of you, all of us, for standing up, and especially a tribute to our indigenous brothers and sisters for leading the way for us all. There was also another court ruling just in the last couple of days that basically said that the Trump administration cannot simply overturn rulings of the Obama administration. They issued this ruling specifically with regard to a ruling that requires methane limits on oil and gas wells. So this was an Obama-era ruling. It was a good ruling. Came a little bit late in the game, but still it was good. And then the Trump administration said, no, we don't need it. We're going to just overturn that. So it turns out you can't just overturn a ruling. You have to go through, according to the court, you have to go through a similar process of holding hearings and getting public input. You can't just toss out a ruling that has been implemented according to a democratic process. So yay democracy, and yay separation of powers, and yay for the courts who are standing up for the democratic process. So that's good news, not just because of methane and the controls on methane that must go forward now. It's also really good news because the courts are saying this is not just limited to that ruling. It's applicable essentially to all of the rulings, environmental, interior, financial, whatever, that the Trump administration cannot simply throw out rulings that have been adopted through a legitimate process. So, hold on to your hat. Let's see how far this will go. And in the meantime, keep up that fight. Let's keep fighting for democracy, knowing that the Trump administration is in fact throwing democracy under the bus in terms of violating separation of powers. It's attacks on the judiciary. It's attacks on the press, freedom of the press, and so on. It's attacks on the Constitution, not only our constitutional civil liberties, our right to freedom of press, freedom of assembly, freedom of protest, those rights that are being encroached on, but also the constitutional requirement that a member of the federal government, in particular the president, cannot be taking money from foreign sources, the so-called emoluments clause, that the Trump administration is violating right and left through their 500 global businesses through which they're taking all kinds of money, which the Constitution rightly cautioned against because it creates the potential to be bribed. So all else aside, we know that there are serious constitutional violations going on here. So stay strong, stand up, let's keep fighting for democracy. And as Naomi Klein warned recently in her book and her movie, No is Not Enough, it's important to be on alert for the next crisis, the next attack on democracy, which could come through climate crisis, through a storm, through some terrorist crisis. Just be aware that the encroachments against our civil liberties, against the basics of our democracy, these encroachments are ongoing, and we all need to be on the alert for the crises that may be used as an excuse to try to shut down democracy. But there are many examples out there of how people get out with their pots and pans, with their candlelights. South Korea is a good example. South Korea just impeached their corrupt, very conservative president by getting out in large numbers with their candlelight vigils. This is how democracy works. When there are transgressions against democracy, we need to be ready to stand up. So keep up your good work. Let's keep doing this. A couple of quick shout outs. Patricia Augustine, hi from New Jersey. Andrea Radich, hi from Port Angeles, Washington. Chris Nussbaum, Peace Over Profits. Lori Lamb, Green Party Worldwide. Tracy McFadden, people need you. Thank you. We need each other. We need to hear the truth, and we need to hear it explained in better terms for people to understand. Thank you so much. Ron Birch, I hate when I hear people say, you don't know anything about foreign policy. You are on top of it. Come see us in Missouri. Hi, Ron. Yes, I'm trying to talk to you about that. I'll try to give you a call. Thank you for tuning in. Ron is helping the Missouri Green Party in a big way. Umbra Tresido, Jill is handling this better than I am. I give her credit. Mainly Umbra, because I've seen this before. I was actually, I was in medical school, believe it or not, during the Cold War, when physicians on both sides of the divide got together and said, hey, this is not good for our health. We need to get rid of those nuclear weapons, and we're not going to let our governments stand in the way. And it was everyday people getting together from the U.S. and from the Soviet Union that made big inroads and made those first steps towards nuclear disarmament. So, now in the age of internet and international communications, it's really time for us to pick up on that and to take this to its logical conclusion. As Martin Luther King says, it's a choice between community or chaos, and we are seeing that playing out right now on the Korean Peninsula and lots of other places. So time for us to stand up for that community that all of you out there on this fireside chat represent. La Ivy Melendez, Dr. Jill Stein, thank you for keeping us informed. Naima Nicole, Colorado Jill Volunteer for Life, thank you. Leroy A. Bartell, hello from Savannah, Georgia. People, planet, and peace over profit. Well, back to you, Mr. Bartell. Jay-Z Zwick from Orlando. Going strong in Orlando. Orlando strong. Thank you, Orlando. So here's some questions. Ron says, and comments, share this video so we can let people see that our foreign policy knowledge is on point. And thank you, Ron. That's really the Green Party's foreign policy knowledge, which is on point. We're only as strong as we are as a team. I think we all learn that over and over again. John Ballness says, say something funny about CNN. Well, let me say, we're closely related here to CNN. We're GNN, the Green News Network. Good news is green news, or green news is good news. Something funny I can say is that CNN actually allowed me on their programming about 2 weeks ago, and you can find that on our Facebook page, and actually gave me really fair airtime. So I'd say, come on, CNN, let's see some more of that. That's really great. Lance Smith, thank you for addressing this topic. Umbra Trocido, America is the biggest axis of evil. Well, you know, Martin Luther King did have something to say about that we are the biggest, what did he say? The biggest purveyor of violence around the world. Global opinion polls actually agree with that. And you know who else said something to that effect? Let's see if I can recall his name. I will come back to it. But another very famous, noteworthy person has also made very compelling comments to that effect. Frederick Douglass, as a matter of fact, that's who I was trying to think of. Frederick Douglass, in his comments about Independence Day, July 4th, back in the mid-1800s, had some just unbelievable knock your socks off, probably most powerful ever comments about U.S. and foreign policy. Take a look. Really worth looking up. That's Frederick Douglass, comments on July 4th, Independence Day. George Scott, what happened to detente? Exactly, we need to bring it back. Benjamin Pegg, I was born in Korea, but I want a peaceful outcome. I do not like North Korea's government, but being reasonable will be more successful than acts of aggression. And I want to agree with Benjamin there, and that's exactly what I hear from our Green colleagues in South Korea. They don't like this nuclear weapons, fear-mongering from either side, and they want both sides to stand down. And they are very much, hurting for reunification. These are families which are divided and have been divided for a very long time. So this is how we move forward, as Benjamin says, by being reasonable and by backing off of this of these war drums that are being beaten and these mock nuclear weapons exercises. And I think the U.S. also needs to back off of a first-use policy. Who wouldn't be terrified out of their minds by a first-use policy? We all need to sign on to no first use and then get rid of the nukes. April Divine, why do we decide who gets nuclear weapons? Rigo Estrada, thing is, North Korea will take advantage of U.S. turmoil. What we need to understand is both major parties are damaged beyond repair. They may withhold power by force, if not a world war. We may be fighting both one before the other, and I mean civil unrest into revolution. Agreed. There's just incredible, the way forward here at the domestic level and at the international level is through a clear commitment to human rights, international law, global justice. It's not so complicated. If democracy has something to say about it, then the agenda for people, planet, and peace will prevail. Glenn Bennett, the Korean missile is said to have gone 1,000 miles high. The International Space Station and lots of satellites are only 250 miles from the surface of the Earth. What could possibly go wrong? Our planet needs the UN to be empowered to exercise oversight and regulation while working to achieve universal nuclear disarmament. Thank you, Glenn. Pete Sounds, we pulled out of Vietnam and they're fine. We need to pull out of Korea. And in fact, this is what most Koreans, South Koreans, are calling for. That is pulling back from, getting rid of the U.S. nuclear missile system, this THAAD nuclear defense system, and undertaking negotiations with diplomacy and with respect. South Korea and North Korea actually have a whole program for economic development and joint ventures and trust building. These are families who are very invested in this process. We need to respect that and let them take the lead. Jesse Grendon, or rather Gendron, Josie Gendron. The solution is to stop meddling in everyone's affairs. We created ISIS by meddling. Let's clean our own house, deal with the inequalities, fix health care, so it again is illegal to profit for health care. Well, we certainly need to set up the alternative to that, because right now it's profits over people. And not only do we have the Trump administration promoting Trump Care, which will throw 22 million people off of health care insurance in the next 10 years and more after that, but we also have the Democrats who've basically stood in the way of a Medicare for all single-payer system with health care as a human right, which is exactly what we need, doesn't cost us any more, everybody in, nobody out. So it's not just that Republicans are destroying it, Democrats have stood in the way of true health care reform. The only sustainable and just way to provide health care is through a Medicare for all system. So let's be very clear, this has been a bipartisan crisis, as Josie pointed out. Tracy McFadden says, Jill, Trump is going to cut assisted living heating help. Bernie said 20,000 seniors in Vermont alone. What are we going to do about him? He's tearing America apart with the same poor white Americans who voted for him. I'm sick to my stomach about it. What are these seniors going to do? Exactly, Tracy. You know, this is why we have to stand together and stand tall and stand for solutions at our state and local level as well as at the national level. Trump is not, Trump is a disaster, but the Democrats have likewise failed and have embraced austerity too, maybe not quite as bad in some ways, but we're on a sinking ship with either party. So it's really important that we build, that we stand together, that we resist, and that we not let them give up and make us feel helpless and hopeless. Remember the words of Alice Walker, that the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. We do have the power. Look at this success we just had on Standing Rock, the success in the court around the protecting the rulings, that the Trump administration cannot just throw them out willy-nilly. We need to continue to stand up and to stand together and insist on these solutions and support the candidates who are standing up for the kind of world that we deserve. Jimmy T says, disability activists are on hour 9 of a sit-in at Republican Arizona Senator Jeff Flake's Phoenix office. So big shout out to these disability activists sitting in at Jeff Flake's office. If you're in Arizona, consider going to join them. They won't leave until he will vote no on Trump Care and save Medicare from up to $3.8 trillion in cuts. Share it out and call his Phoenix office. Okay, here's the number, 602-840-1891, to show solidarity, national solidarity, to get another senator to stand up and oppose the Trump Care's disastrous cuts to Medicaid. And, what's happening to Senator Flake happened, I understand, to a lot of senators who went home over the 4th of July holiday. Many of them were not able to hold. In fact, they shied away from public gatherings altogether because they knew they were going to get so much grief about this assault on our health insurance, ultimately an assault on our health. Pete Sound says, go Sue. Rigo Estrada said, I believe that started to leak already. Am I wrong? You are right, Rigo. In the test phase, there actually was leaking of the Dakota Access Pipeline. As many of the other pipelines have leaked, who are run by the same company. So very critical that we stand up, that we take heart. Remember, there have been an additional 10 major infrastructure fossil fuel projects, coal export terminals, LNG terminals, refineries, and so on, that have been stopped in like the last 2 years alone. So we've had many successes. We should not be building any additional infrastructure in fossil fuels. We should be in the business of rapidly decommissioning them and putting people to work. And I'll end just saying the Green New Deal is the comprehensive solution here. It provides the jobs that we need, the living wages that we need, the assurance of a just transition, not only for the fossil fuel industry, but also for the weapons and the military industry. It is a solution to the climate crisis. We call for 100% clean renewables by 2030, in time to solve the climate crisis, as we solve our economic crisis, as we jumpstart a clean, green, healthy, sustainable economy, and we make the friggin' wars for oil obsolete. These are the solutions we deserve. This is how we get to an America and a world that works for all of us. Thank you all so much. Please like this. Please share it. Let's get the word out. We the people do have the power. We are people rising up, and we cannot be stopped. Together, we are an unstoppable force. Let's make it happen. Green news is good news, and I'll see you here next week. Thank you so much. Keep up the fight. All the best. Take care.